The twin suns hung low over the spires of the royal capital, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. The great plaza before the palace brimmed with movement as citizens from every district crowded together, eager to witness the event that had been whispered about for weeks. Word had spread faster than the wind across the dunes of the desert provinces and through the icy corridors of the far northern cities. The queen's daughter was returning. For 12 long years her absence had been an open wound in the heart of the empire. She had vanished during a diplomatic journey to the distant fringe worlds. A royal vessel had been found adrift. Months later, its hull scarred by weapons fire and its crew missing. The empire had mourned and moved on, but not without the lingering taste of grief and unanswered questions. No one had imagined she would ever set foot here again. Yet now the queen herself stood upon the grand balcony overlooking the plaza, wearing a robe of deep green, woven with silver threads. Her hands were steady, but her eyes scanned the horizon with the quiet hunger of a mother who had waited too long. The air trembled with the deep hum of an approaching ship. A sleek silver craft descended through the clouds, its underside glowing from the heat of re-entry. A hush spread through the crowd. The vessel slowed, hovering above the landing platform before settling down with a gentle hiss. The main hatch opened and a tall, slender figure appeared. Her hair was darker than the queen remembered, and her face carried the marks of years spent under foreign suns. She wore no crown, only a simple tunic of pale blue and a long coat, marked with small patches of wear. At her side stood a boy. He was small, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. His skin was pale compared to the bronze tones of the empire, and his eyes were a shade of gray that caught the light in a strange way. The boy's hand was wrapped tightly in the woman's, and he walked with a quiet wariness that made the crowd lean forward to study him. A ripple of murmurs passed through the plaza. Voices rose in surprised disbelief and something darker. The word human slid between lips like a forbidden sound. The queen felt her breath catch. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her private chambers. She had rehearsed the words she might say, practiced keeping her dignity no matter what she saw. But the sight of that small hand in her daughter's, and the fragile line of his shoulders cracked something inside her. She descended the steps from the balcony, her guards following at a respectful distance. The crowd parted before her when they met in the middle of the platform. The queen stopped just a step away. Her daughter bowed her head in respect, though her eyes never left the queen's face for a heartbeat. They simply stood there, their gazes locked. The boy shifted slightly behind the woman, but she gave his hand a gentle squeeze, and he stayed still. Welcome home. The queen's voice was steady, though her throat felt tight. The words seemed to tremble in the air between them. It is good to be here again, Mother, the woman replied, though her tone carried a weight that made the queen wonder how many storms had passed over her since they last spoke. The queen's eyes moved to the boy. Who is this? She asked. Woman's fingers tightened on the child's hand. This is Eli, she said simply. He is my son. Words hit the queen harder than any blade could have. The sound of the crowd shifted again, louder, now a mix of gasps and low, angry mutters. Somewhere among them, someone spat on the stone floor. The queen's mind raced. There were no records of her daughter marrying, no alliances forged that could explain this. And the boy's human features were unmistakable. The empire had little contact with humans beyond trade and the occasional tense negotiation. They were seen as a younger species, fragile, unpredictable, and dangerous in ways that were hard to measure. Bringing one into the royal bloodline would be unthinkable to many here yet. As the queen looked at the boy, she saw no threat in his eyes, only a cautious curiosity. His fingers curled around her daughter's with a grip that spoke of trust and perhaps fear. The queen took a slow breath and forced her expression to remain calm. Come, she said finally. There's much to speak of and not here before the crowd. Woman inclined her head, and together they walked toward the palace gates. The boy glanced up at the towering walls and gleaming towers, his eyes flickering between awe and suspicion. The guards flanked them on either side, their armor glinting in the late light. Behind them, the plaza buzzed with speculation. Inside the palace, the corridors stretched wide and high, their walls inlaid with intricate patterns of crystal and stone. Servants bowed low as the queen passed, though their eyes lingered on the boy. Leora, as the queen's daughter had been named since birth, kept her pace steady, never once loosening her hold on Eli's hand. They were led to a private chamber where the heavy doors closed behind them, shutting out the murmurs of the court. The queen studied her daughter in the quiet light of the room, the lines around her eyes, the subtle scar along her jaw. These were not the marks of someone who had lived in safety. She reached out and placed a hand on her daughter's cheek for just a moment before pulling it back. "Tell me everything," she said. Her voice was not that of a ruler but of a mother. Her daughter hesitated. Her gaze flicked toward Eli, then back to her mother. "Not yet," she said softly. But soon the queen felt the old ache of unanswered questions pressing against her ribs. But she let the moment stand. She had waited years. She could wait a little longer. Yet as she looked again at the boy standing quietly by his mother's side, she knew this was no ordinary return. This was the opening of a door to something the Empire was not ready to face. The first night in the palace passed in heavy silence. The long corridors that once felt like home to Leora now seemed like halls of watching eyes. Every shadow felt deeper, every whisper seemed sharper. Servants carried trays of food into the private chamber, but their eyes always found Ele before quickly turning away and lowering their heads. By morning, the palace had already begun to hum with rumors. Nobles gathered in the shaded gardens, their robes brushing the grass as they leaned toward one another, speaking in low voices. Some claimed the boy was a political pawn sent by human governments to gain influence. Others whispered of darker things, strange human abilities hidden in their bloodlines. None of them could imagine the boy was simply a child who had lost his home. The queen moved through her duties with the calm of a ruler, but her thoughts kept circling back to the chamber where her daughter and the boy stayed. She wanted to demand answers now, yet she knew if she pressed too soon she might lose the chance to truly understand what had happened all these years. At the mid-morning meal, the grand hall filled with courtiers. Ministers and advisors took their places at long tables. Their gazes followed Leora as she entered, dressed in simple clothes without the jewels or ornaments expected of a royal daughter. Eli walked at her side, his steps careful, as though every stone tile might hide a trap. He kept close to her, never letting his hand leave hers. The food was rich and fragrant, but there was little talk from their table. The queen's chief advisor, a thin man with a sharp gaze, spoke first. "Your return is most unexpected," he said, "and your companion even more." So his eyes flickered to Eli, who looked down at his plate. Leora's reply was calm. "I came back because it was time." "And why now, after so many years?" the man asked, leaning forward. "Because the path I was on has ended," she said. "Because my son deserves a home." Word "son" spread through the hall like a spark through dry grass. Voices rose as nobles turned to one another, some with disbelief, others with outrage. The chief advisor's lips tightened, and he leaned back in his chair. "I see," he murmured, though his tone suggested he did not. Taliate quietly, unaware of the centuries of politics pressing down around him. The queen watched every reaction in the hall, noting who looked angry, who looked fearful, and who looked thoughtful. She knew the presence of the boy could shake the empire in ways no battle ever could. After the meal, Leora walked with Eli through the palace gardens. The air was heavy with the scent of flowering vines. Birds of brilliant colors darted between branches. Eli stopped to watch a small winged creature drink from a blossom. His face lit with wonder for the first time since they had arrived. "It is beautiful here," he said softly. Leora smiled, but her eyes were clouded. "I am glad you think so," she replied, though her tone held a shadow. They reached a stone bench beneath a tree with silver leaves. Leora sat, pulling Eli close. "The palace is not safe for us," she said quietly. "You must stay near me always." "Why?" he asked. "Because there are those who fear what they do not know," she answered, "and you are something they do not know." Meanwhile, inside the palace walls, the council chamber filled The queen listened as her ministers spoke in sharp voices. Some demanded the boy be sent away for the safety of the realm. Others argued it was too dangerous to let him remain without knowing his origin. The queen held up her hand, and the room fell silent. "Until I hear the truth from my daughter, I will not act," she said. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt the tension coil tighter. That evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon, a servant approached Leora with a sealed message. It bore no name, only the royal crest. She broke the wax and read the short lines: "Meet me at the West Terrace tonight. Come alone." She looked toward Ile, playing with a carved wooden animal the queen had sent him earlier in the day. She tucked the note away and forced a smile. When night fell, she led Eli to his bed in the adjoining room, promising she would be back soon. She moved through the quiet halls to the West Terrace. The moonlight bathed the marble floor in silver. A figure stood waiting, cloaked in shadow. "You should not have returned," the voice said low and urgent. Leora recognized it at once, a member of the old royal guard, someone she had trusted years ago. "They will not accept him. You cannot keep him here. It is too dangerous." "I will not abandon him," she said. "He is my son." The figure stepped closer. "His kind is feared here. The council will find a way to remove him from you. You must take him and leave before it is too late." Leora felt a heat rise in her chest. "I have run enough," she said. "If they wish to take him, they will have to face me, and perhaps even you, if you remember your oaths." The guard's jaw tightened. "I remember," he said, "but I also know what the council is capable of." He turned and melted into the shadows, leaving her alone with the whisper of the night air. She returned to the chamber to find Eli awake, sitting on the edge of his bed. He looked up at her with wide eyes. "I dreamed you were gone," he said. She knelt beside him. "I will never leave you," she promised, drawing him close. He rested his head on her shoulder, and she held him there until his breathing slowed. Somewhere beyond the heavy walls of the palace, voices plotted in secret. The queen sensed the danger, but could not yet see its shape. And Leora knew the whispers were not just words anymore. They were becoming the first steps of something much darker, something that would soon force her to choose between her past and the only family she had left. The morning began with the heavy sound of the palace bells calling the council to assembly. The great chamber was a circle of towering columns and polished stone, with a domed ceiling painted in the colors of the empire's crest. The queen entered, first taking her seat upon the high dais, while the ministers and nobles gathered below. Each wore the long flowing robes of their station, yet the air between them was anything but graceful. Leora stood near the center, her posture straight, her chin lifted, though her eyes were cool. She had brought Eli with her against the suggestion of the palace guards. The boy stood close to her side, looking up at the high ceiling, his small fingers curled around the edge of her sleeve. The queen's gaze softened when it fell on him, but the room as a whole reacted differently. Chief Minister rose, his voice echoing across the chamber. "We gather today to speak of the human child who now resides within the royal walls. His presence here has already stirred unrest in the outer provinces where old fears of human ambition still run deep. We demand to know his origin, his purpose, and his connection to the royal line." Leora's answer came without hesitation. "He's my son. I found him alone on a distant world when war fell upon it. I swore to protect him and raise him as my own." "Your own," the minister repeated, as if tasting the words with disbelief. "You would have us believe that a princess of this empire vanished for more than a decade, only to return with a child from a race we barely trust." Another counselor rose. "Humans are unpredictable. Their technology is crude, yet their ambition is fierce. Who is to say this child is not a hidden weapon planted among us to watch and listen?" The queen's eyes narrowed enough. She spoke the word like a blade cutting through the noise. "You will not accuse a child of espionage without cause." Yet the room did not still. The arguments rolled on, growing sharper. Some pressed for the boy's removal to a secure outpost under guard. Others whispered of more final solutions. Leora stood unmoving, but her grip on Eli's shoulder tightened. At last the queen raised her hand. The chamber fell silent. My daughter has returned after many years. She will speak when she is ready. Until then, the boy remains under my protection. Any who move against him will answer to me directly. The session closed with no agreement, only a thicker cloud of tension hanging over the room. Liara led Eli away through the tall doors, ignoring the stares that followed them. They returned to the gardens, hoping for a moment of peace. The scent of the silver leaf trees drifted on the breeze. Eli knelt beside a shallow pond watching small fish dart between the stones. I do not think they like me here, he said quietly. Liara sat beside him. There will always be those who fear what they do not understand, she told him. That is not your fault. As the suns began to sink, a figure stepped from behind the trees. It was a young palace guard in silver armor. His eyes flicked to Liara, then to Eli. You should return to your chambers, he said in a low tone. There are whispers of danger tonight. Liara studied his face, searching for deceit, but found only concern. We will be careful, she replied, though she felt the unease grow inside her. That night she left a small lamp burning beside Eli's bed while she sat in the adjoining room, reading the old scrolls she had brought from the colony world. She heard a faint sound like metal sliding against stone. She rose quietly, stepping toward the door that opened into the hallway. The door burst inward before she could reach it. Two masked figures slipped inside, their movements quick and silent. Their blades glinted in the lamplight. Liara's heart slammed against her ribs. She grabbed the nearest chair and swung it hard, knocking one of the intruders off balance. The other moved toward Eli's bed, but she lunged between them, her coat catching on the edge of the bed. Famila's eyes flew open as the fight raged. He saw the glint of a dagger aimed for Liara's back. Without thinking, he reached out and shouted a word he did not know. The air seemed to ripple, and a shockwave burst from his small hands, throwing the masked attacker against the far wall. The room fell into stunned silence for a heartbeat. Liara turned to Eli, her eyes wide. But there was no time to speak. The first intruder scrambled to his feet and fled through the open door. The second groaned and rolled over before stumbling after him. Their footsteps faded down the hall. Liara rushed to Eli, pulling him into her arms. Are you hurt? She asked. He shook his head, but his eyes were wide with fear and confusion. What did I do? He whispered. She held him tighter. Something I did not know you could, she murmured. Guards poured into the room moments later. The queen herself arrived, her robe hastily tied over her nightclothes. When she saw the overturned furniture and the marks on the walls, her face turned to stone. She ordered the captain of the guard to seal the palace and find the attackers. But in her mind, a deeper thought took root. The boy was not ordinary. Later, in the quiet of the royal chamber, the queen faced Liara. You must tell me the truth, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched her daughter's face. Liara hesitated. She looked at Eli, sleeping curled under a blanket, his brow furrowed even in rest. She met her mother's gaze on the world where I lived after the crash. I found him among the ruins of a human settlement. They had been attacked by raiders. I never learned why I raised him as my own, but over the years, I saw signs. He heals faster than others. He hears things before they are spoken. Tonight you saw it for yourself. He has a power I do not understand. The queen leaned back in her chair. The council will see this as proof of their fears, she said. Some will call him a threat. Others will see him as a prize. We cannot let either claim him. Liara's jaw set. Then we protect him, she said, no matter what it takes. The queen nodded slowly, though her mind was already turning through the possible paths ahead. The night had shown them both that the danger was no longer distant. It was here, inside the palace walls, and it would not stop until the boy's fate was decided. The palace did not sleep after the attack. The corridors were alive with the sound of boots on stone and the flash of torchlight against the walls. Guards searched every room, every passage, every balcony, but the masked intruders had vanished as if they were never there. The queen stood on the balcony of her private chamber, watching the city lights in the distance. Her hands rested on the railing, but her mind was deep in the shadows of doubt. Someone within her own court had allowed this to happen in the guest quarters. Leora packed what little she and Eli had brought. She moved with the silent speed of someone who had run before every muscle tight with the knowledge that staying would mean more danger. She glanced at the boy sleeping under a heavy blanket. The memory of his power flaring in the air still burned in her mind. She had always known he was different, but she had hoped to hide it now. The whole palace might suspect. She thought of the guard who had warned her the day before. Perhaps he had known this was coming. Perhaps others knew too. If she could slip out before sunrise, they might reach the outer markets and disappear among the traders. From there they could find a ship and vanish into the scattered worlds, where the Empire's eyes rarely looked. But when she stepped toward the bed, a figure was standing in the doorway. The queen was framed in the dim light of the hall. Her robe was plain, her hair unbound, but her presence filled the room. "You are leaving," she said. It was not a question. Leora's hands tightened on the strap of her pack. "You saw what happened last night," she replied. "They will not stop until he is gone, or until they have taken him from me." The queen stepped into the room and closed the door. The guards outside remained still as statues. She moved to stand beside the bed, looking down at Eli. His face was peaceful now, but she could see the faint lines of fear that lingered even in sleep. "Tell me everything," she said quietly. "I need to understand what happened in those years when you were gone." Leora hesitated, but something in her mother's voice broke the wall she had built. She began to speak of the crash on the colony world, of waking to smoke and fire, and the bodies of the crew. She told of wandering for days through the ruined settlements, until she stumbled upon a small human boy hiding in the remains of a house. His family was gone, taken by raiders who had stripped the world of anything valuable. She told of her vow to protect him, and how she had stayed hidden among the human communities, working and trading, and moving often so none would ask too many questions. She spoke of the times Eli had fallen from a height, or been cut by sharp metal, yet healed within hours. She told of the way he could hear a storm coming before any cloud formed, and how animals seemed to quiet when he came near. She had never understood it, only known that it made him a target, and that was why they never stayed in one place for long. Queen listened without interrupting. Her eyes stayed on her daughter's face, but her thoughts were turning with every word. The Empire had always seen humans as a younger, weaker race, but what Leora described was no weakness. It was something that could frighten those in power, or tempt them to use it. When Leora finished, there was silence. The queen reached down and touched Eli's hair. "He is not safe here," she said, "and yet if you run, they will hunt you until the ends of the stars. There will be no peace for him or for you then." "What do you suggest?" Leora asked. Her voice was sharp, not in anger, but in the edge of fear. "I cannot wait for them to try again. I will not." The queen looked at her daughter with the weight of years in her eyes. "You and I stand at the center of the same storm," she said. "If you leave, I cannot protect you. If you stay, I cannot promise it will be without danger, but here at least you will have the shield of my name and the strength of the throne, and perhaps we can change what this empire believes." Leora's lips parted to reply, but a knock came at the door. The captain of the guard entered, bowing low. "We have traced the intruders to a storage wing, unused for many years," he said. "They escaped through an old passage into the city." The queen dismissed him with a nod, and he withdrew. She turned back to her daughter. "You have until morning to decide. Stay, and we fight together, or go and face whatever comes alone." That night Leora did not sleep. She sat by Eli's bed, watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing. She thought of the years they had spent running, of the faces they had left behind, and of the home she had once known. She thought of her mother not as a ruler, but as the woman who had held her when she was a child. When the first light of dawn touched the windows, she rose and went to the queen's chambers. Her mother was already awake, standing at the window, watching the sun lift over the city. "I will stay," Leora said. The queen turned her head only slightly, enough for her daughter to see the faintest trace of relief. "Then we prepare," she said. "We will not hide him, but we will not leave him unguarded, and if the council moves against us, we will be ready by mid-morning." The queen called for a gathering in the throne hall. The nobles and ministers came in expecting another argument over the boy. Instead, they found the queen standing with Leora at her side and Eli before them. The queen's voice carried through the hall as she declared the boy under her personal protection and named him a ward of the royal family. Any harm that came to him, she said, would be an insult to the crown itself. The council erupted in protests, but the queen's gaze cut through them. Her authority was final. She dismissed the assembly, and the sound of her voice lingered in the vaulted space long after the doors closed. Leora looked down at Eli and saw the confusion in his eyes. She knelt beside him. "You are safe for now," she whispered, "but the road ahead will not be easy." The boy nodded, though he did not understand all her words. He only knew she was here, and for him that was enough. In the high seat, the queen watched them both and thought of the battle still to come. Days that followed the queen's public declaration were unlike any the palace had seen in years. Outside the palace walls, the streets buzzed with talk of the human boy. Some spoke of it with hope, saying it meant the empire might finally look beyond its old fears. Others spoke with dread, believing it to be the first step toward weakness or even ruin. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was sharper than a blade. Guards patrolled every hall in pairs. Servants moved quickly with eyes lowered. The council still met in secret rooms, their voices carrying the scent of discontent through the corridors, but none dared move openly against the queen while her words from the throne still echoed in the minds of the Pleura kept Eli close at all times. They walked the gardens together under the silver leaf trees, and sometimes she would take him to the high balcony where the city stretched out like a field of stars. He would lean against the railing, staring at the lights with quiet wonder. Once he asked her if all of this would ever feel like home. She told him home was not a place, but the people who stayed with you, no matter what happened. Queen watched them from a distance, often joining them in the evenings when the sun sank low and the sky burned gold. She spoke to Eli, gently asking him about the worlds he had seen and the games he played on the colony world. He was shy at first, but little by little he began to answer and sometimes even smile. The queen began to see him not as a political storm, but as a child with a heart and dreams. Still, the danger had not passed. One night, as the palace settled into quiet, the queen's most trusted guard entered her private chambers with a sealed message. It had been taken from a courier in the outer markets. The letter spoke in coded words, but its meaning was clear. There were still those who would come for the boy, not only from within the empire, but from far beyond its borders. They had heard of the strange power he carried, and they wanted it for themselves. Queen summoned Leora at once and showed her the letter. Leora's eyes darkened, but she did not look away. "They will keep coming," she said. "I knew this when I chose to stay. Then we make them regret coming here," the queen replied. She ordered new defenses for the palace gates and called for loyal commanders from the far provinces to strengthen the guard around her daughter and the boy. The next weeks became a test of endurance. Rumors rose and fell like waves. Some said the queen was preparing to name Eli as a formal heir. Others claimed he was understudy by the royal scholars for his strange gifts. Council grew restless, but the queen never wavered. She appeared in public with Leora and Eli at her side, walking through the market streets, speaking to the people. Her presence made it harder for enemies to act in the open. One morning, Eli stood in the training yard watching the palace guards practice with wooden staves. The captain, a grizzled veteran, noticed him and walked over. "Would you like to try?" he asked. Eli hesitated, glancing at Leora. She nodded, and he took the staff in his small hands. The captain moved slowly, showing him simple steps and how to hold his balance. Eli laughed when he managed to block a gentle strike. For the first time in many days, the sound of his laughter filled the air. That night, Leora sat with the queen on the balcony. The city below shimmered in the starlight. The queen spoke quietly. "I used to think strength was only in the armies we commanded or the power we held over others. But now I see it in how you have carried this child through danger across worlds and never let go. That is a kind of strength I never learned until now. Liora looked at her mother for a long moment. Then let that strength be the foundation for what comes next, she said. Let the Empire see him not as a threat, but as proof that we can be more than what we have always been. The Queen nodded. She knew change would not come quickly, and that there would be battles ahead both in the council and in the hearts of the people. But she also knew that the choice had already been made. The boy would stay, and together they would face whatever followed. On the last day of the harvest festival, the Queen called the people to the grand plaza. The air was bright with banners and the sound of drums. She stood before the crowd with Liora on one side and Eli on the other. Her voice carried across the square as she spoke of unity and the courage to protect those who could not protect themselves. She told them of a boy who had lost everything yet found a family and a home among strangers. She told them that the future of the Empire depended on its ability to stand together, no matter the shape of their hands or the color of their eyes. When she finished, she placed her hand on Eli's shoulder, and the people bowed in silence. It was not full acceptance, not yet, but it was a step. The Queen knew that in the days to come there would be more challenges. There would be moments when fear would rise again, and voices would call for old walls to be rebuilt. But she also knew that seeds had been planted, and in time they could grow. That evening, as the festival fires burned low, Eli stood at the highest balcony of the palace. Liora came to stand beside him. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke. I think maybe this is home now. She smiled and placed her hand over his. Yes, she said, I think it is. Far below, the city lights flickered like 1,000 stars, and above them, the real stars stretched forever across the night sky. The Empire was still vast and full of shadows. But here in this moment, Queen, her daughter, and the boy stood together, bound not by blood alone, but by the choice to protect each other and to face the future side by side. The end.